The old porch swing creaked a gentle rhythm as Sergeant Major, retired, Robert "Bob" Johnson settled into it, a worn baseball cap shielding his eyes from the afternoon sun. He wasn't a big man, but his presence filled the space. His hands, calloused and scarred, rested on his knees, a roadmap of a life lived in service. He sighed, a sound that spoke of both contentment and a hint of lingering memories. 60 minutes. That's what they wanted. 60 minutes to summarize a lifetime, or at least the most impactful part of it. His gaze drifted toward the meticulously manicured lawn, a far cry from the dusty, war-torn landscapes he remembered. Retirement suited him, he supposed. Quiet mornings, the company of his grandkids, and the slow, steady rhythm of life. But beneath the calm surface, the echoes of the Gulf War still resonated. Bob cleared his throat. He knew this story. He'd told it countless times, in fragments, to therapists, to fellow veterans, even to his wife, Mary, though she still teared up every time she heard it. But to lay it all out, the highs and the lows, the moments of fear and the fleeting glimpses of hope, that was a different challenge. He knew they wanted the truth, raw and unfiltered. Not the sanitized version he sometimes offered. They wanted to understand what it was really like, the weight of responsibility, the constant threat of danger, the gnawing loneliness, and the unexpected moments of camaraderie that made it all bearable. And, more than anything, they wanted to know how he found his way back, how he learned to live with the memories, how he discovered gratitude amidst the chaos. He took a deep breath. He was ready. "All right," he said, his voice raspy but firm. "Where do you want me to start?" He looked toward the gentle breeze, his eyes half closed. "I suppose it all began with a dare, and a whole lot of misplaced patriotism." The dare. It seems silly now, a childish taunt thrown across a dusty baseball field after a particularly lackluster game. He was fresh out of high school, full of bravado and a vague sense of unease about the future. His friends, fueled by cheap beer and a misguided sense of invincibility, were all talking about what they weren't going to do. Settle down. Get a boring job. Be like their dads. Then came the challenge, aimed directly at Bob, the quiet kid who always seemed to be holding something back. "Bet you wouldn't even last a week in the army, Johnson." The words hung in the air, a gauntlet thrown down. Looking back, Bob knew it wasn't just the dare. It was more than that. His grandfather had fought in World War II, his father in Vietnam. There was a sense of duty, a legacy to uphold, even if he couldn't articulate it then. And maybe, just maybe, a desperate need to prove something, not just to his friends, but to himself. So, the next morning, hungover and still buzzing with a mixture of fear and excitement, he walked into the local recruitment office. The recruiter, a slick-haired man with a practiced smile, sized him up instantly. "Looking to serve your country, son?" Bob swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." The process was a blur. Physical exams, aptitude tests, endless paperwork. He barely had time to think before he was on a bus headed to Fort Benning, Georgia, the sprawling home of the infantry. He remembered staring out the window, watching the familiar landscape of his small town fade into the distance, replaced by the unknown. He didn't tell his parents about the dare, of course. He framed it as a calling, a patriotic duty. They were proud, though his mother's eyes held a glimmer of worry he couldn't quite decipher. His father, a stoic man of few words, simply clapped him on the back and said, "Make us proud, son." And so, Robert Johnson, the quiet kid from a small town, began his journey into the heart of the United States Army. A journey that would test him in ways he could never have imagined. A journey that would lead him to the deserts of Kuwait and Iraq, and ultimately, back home, a changed man. Fort Benning was a different world. The air crackled with energy, a constant hum of activity that never seemed to stop. Drill sergeants, their faces etched with years of experience and their voices booming like thunder, ruled the roost. They were there to break you down, to strip away everything you thought you knew about yourself, and rebuild you into a soldier. The first few weeks were a blur of physical exertion and mental exhaustion. Push-ups until your arms screamed, running until your lungs burned, and endless drills that seemed pointless at the time. Learning to march in perfect formation, to salute with precision, to disassemble and reassemble a rifle blindfolded. It was all designed to instill discipline, obedience, and a sense of teamwork. Bob remembered the constant yelling, the sleep deprivation, the feeling of being pushed to his absolute limit. There were times he wanted to quit, to pack his bags and go home. But something kept him going. Pride, maybe. Or the fear of disappointing his family. Or perhaps, a growing sense of belonging. He started to bond with his fellow recruits. There was Miller, a wisecracking kid from Chicago who always had a joke to lighten the mood. And Ramirez, a quiet but fiercely determined young man from Texas. They were all different, from different backgrounds, but they were united by a common purpose, to become soldiers. They shared stories, they shared hardships, and they shared a growing sense of camaraderie. They learned to rely on each other, to trust each other, to have each other's backs. They were becoming a team, a brotherhood forged in the crucible of basic training. Bob's initial expectations were naive, to say the least. He envisioned adventure, excitement, a chance to see the world. He hadn't fully grasped the reality of war, the sacrifice, the potential for loss. He thought it would be like the movies, a heroic tale of good versus evil. He soon learned that it was much more complicated than that. That war was messy, brutal, and often senseless. And that the real heroes were the ones who managed to survive, both physically and emotionally. He was slowly, but surely, transforming from a naive kid into a soldier. A soldier who was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Or so he thought. The news came suddenly, as big news usually does. One minute, they were running drills, the next, they were packing their bags, preparing for deployment. The Gulf War was heating up, and their unit was being sent in. A mix of emotions swept through the barracks, fear, excitement, and a strange sense of purpose. Bob remembers the hurried goodbyes, the rushed phone calls home, the unspoken anxieties hanging heavy in the air. He managed to get a brief call to his parents, reassuring them that he was ready, that he would be careful. He didn't mention the knot of dread that had formed in his stomach. The journey overseas was long and arduous. Crammed into transport planes, they flew for what seemed like days, stopping at various bases along the way. The landscape changed from lush green to barren desert. The air grew hotter, drier, and the dust seemed to permeate everything. Landing in Saudi Arabia was like stepping into another world. The heat was oppressive, the landscape alien, and the sense of anticipation palpable. They were met by seasoned veterans, their faces grim, their eyes hardened by experience. They were the ones who knew what was coming. The first few days were spent acclimatizing to the environment, setting up base camps, and preparing for the mission ahead. Bob and his fellow soldiers tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, playing cards, telling jokes, and writing letters home. But the undercurrent of tension was always there, a constant reminder of the dangers that lurked just beyond the horizon. He remembers the briefings, the maps, the intelligence reports. The enemy was well equipped, well trained, and dug in deep. The mission was to liberate Kuwait, to drive Saddam Hussein's forces out. It was a daunting task, but they were determined to succeed. As the days passed, the anticipation grew. They knew the invasion was coming, they just didn't know when. The waiting was the hardest part. The uncertainty, the constant fear of the unknown. But they were soldiers. They were trained to follow orders, to face danger head-on, and to never give up. They were ready to go to war. Or so they hoped. Bob remembers one particular morning. The air was still cool, just before dawn, a rare moment of respite from the oppressive heat. They were huddled around a makeshift campfire, brewing coffee and swapping stories. The mood was surprisingly light, a sense of camaraderie that seemed to defy the circumstances. Their unit had been tasked with securing a small village on the outskirts of Kuwait. Intelligence suggested it was lightly defended, but strategically important. It was to be their first real test, their first taste of combat. As they approached the village, the tension began to rise. The landscape was desolate, the buildings crumbling and deserted. There was an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of their own vehicles. It felt like they were driving into a ghost town. Suddenly, a young girl appeared in the road, waving frantically. She was small, dressed in tattered clothes, her face streaked with dirt. She was shouting something in Arabic, her voice high-pitched and frantic. Their interpreter quickly translated. "She says the village is mined. The Iraqis have booby-trapped everything." A wave of apprehension washed over Bob. This was it. This was the moment they had been training for. He took a deep breath and tried to focus. "All right," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Let's move slow and careful. Check every building, every doorway. We don't want any surprises." They dismounted from their vehicles and began to cautiously advance into the village. The air was thick with tension. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every creak and groan of the dilapidated building sent shivers down their spines. Bob remembers the feeling of being hyper-aware, his senses heightened, his adrenaline pumping. He scanned every inch of the surroundings, his finger on the trigger of his rifle. He was ready for anything. And then, they found it. A tripwire, stretched across a doorway, connected to a hidden explosive. It was a crude device, but deadly effective. They carefully disarmed it, their hearts pounding in their chests. They spent the next few hours clearing the village, painstakingly searching for and disarming booby traps. It was slow, nerve-wracking work. But they did it. They secured the village without a single casualty. As the sun began to rise, casting its golden light across the desolate landscape, a sense of relief washed over Bob. They had done it. They had faced their fears and come out on top. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. And in that moment, Bob felt a surge of pride. He was a soldier. And he was ready to fight for his country. The victory in the village, as small as it was, did wonders for morale. It proved they could work together, that their training had prepared them for the challenges ahead. It fostered a sense of confidence that they desperately needed. After securing the village, they set up a temporary aid station. Many of the villagers had fled, but a few remained, mostly the elderly and the infirm. They were scared, hungry, and in desperate need of medical attention. Bob remembers one old woman in particular. She was frail and wrinkled, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and gratitude. She spoke no English, but her expressions spoke volumes. She had a nasty gash on her leg, likely from stepping on debris while fleeing. Their medic, a young man named Davis, cleaned and bandaged the wound. He spoke to her in soothing tones, even though she couldn't understand a word he was saying. He treated her with compassion and respect, as if she were his own grandmother. Bob watched the scene unfold, a sense of warmth spreading through him. It was a stark contrast to the violence and destruction they had witnessed. It was a reminder that there was still good in the world, even in the midst of war. After Davis finished treating the woman, he offered her some food and water. She accepted it gratefully, her eyes twinkling with appreciation. She then reached into her tattered dress and pulled out a small, intricately woven rug. She offered it to Davis as a gift. Davis was hesitant to accept it. He knew she had little to spare. But she insisted, pressing the rug into his hands. He finally relented, accepting the gift with a humble bow. The moment was brief, but profound. It was a simple act of kindness, a gesture of humanity that transcended language and culture. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always room for compassion. Bob never forgot that moment. It was a beacon of hope in a sea of despair. It was a reminder of why they were there, fighting for a better future, for a world where such acts of kindness were commonplace. It strengthened his resolve and renewed his commitment to the mission. It was a small act, but it had a big impact. It was a moment that he would carry with him long after the war was over. It was a reminder that even in war, humanity could prevail. The desert stretched endlessly, a canvas of sand and sky shimmering under the relentless sun. They were part of a larger armored column, pushing deep into Kuwait, engaging Iraqi forces. The initial days had been relatively quiet, skirmishes and minor resistance. But that was about to change. They crested a ridge, and suddenly, all hell broke loose. The air filled with the deafening roar of explosions, the staccato bursts of machine gun fire, and the screech of metal on metal. They were ambushed. Iraqi tanks and artillery opened fire, sending plumes of sand and smoke billowing into the air. Bob remembers the chaos, the confusion, the sheer terror that gripped him. He was in the lead vehicle, and the first rocket-propelled grenade slammed into the side, sending shrapnel flying. The driver was wounded, and the vehicle lurched to a halt. "Contact! Contact!" he screamed into the radio, his voice barely audible above the din. "We're hit. We're hit." He scrambled out of the vehicle, taking cover behind a sand dune. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning fuel and gunpowder. He could see other vehicles in the column erupting in flames, soldiers scrambling for cover. He saw Miller, his friend from basic training, running towards him, his face contorted with fear. "Bob! We're pinned down. We need to get out of here." Bob grabbed his rifle and returned fire, trying to suppress the enemy. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a primal instinct to survive. He was no longer the quiet kid from a small town. He was a soldier, fighting for his life. The battle raged for what seemed like an eternity. The sun beat down mercilessly, the heat radiating off the sand. Bob remembers the taste of grit in his mouth, the sweat stinging his eyes, the constant ringing in his ears. He saw Ramirez, their quiet friend from Texas, take a hit. He went down hard, his body convulsing. Bob tried to reach him, but the enemy fire was too intense. He watched helplessly as Ramirez lay dying in the sand. The loss of Ramirez hit him hard. It was the first time he had seen death up close, the first time he had lost someone he knew. It was a stark reminder of the fragility of life, the randomness of war. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, reinforcements arrived. American attack helicopters swooped in, unleashing a barrage of rockets and machine gun fire. The tide began to turn. The Iraqi forces were overwhelmed and began to retreat. As the battle subsided, a sense of exhaustion washed over Bob. He was covered in dirt and grime, his body aching, his mind numb. He had survived. But he would never be the same. He had seen the face of war, and it had changed him forever. The heat of battle had seared itself into his memory. Ramirez's death haunted Bob. The image of his friend lying lifeless in the sand was seared into his memory. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. He kept replaying the battle in his mind, wondering if he could have done something differently, if he could have saved him. The days that followed were a blur of grief and anger. He felt a deep sense of loss, not just for Ramirez, but for the innocence he had lost, for the naive expectations he had once held. He questioned everything he had believed in, everything he had fought for. He started to distance himself from his fellow soldiers, withdrawing into his own shell. He didn't want to talk, didn't want to share his feelings. He felt alone, isolated, adrift in a sea of despair. One day, their unit was assigned to clear a bombed-out building in Kuwait City. The city had been heavily damaged during the war, and many of the buildings were reduced to rubble. As they sifted through the debris, they came across a horrifying sight. The bodies of several civilians, including women and children, lay buried beneath the rubble. They had been caught in the crossfire, innocent victims of the war. The sight was sickening, heart-wrenching. Bob remembers staring at the lifeless bodies, a wave of nausea washing over him. He felt a profound sense of shame, a sense of responsibility for the suffering he had witnessed. He couldn't reconcile the images of the dead civilians with the ideals he had once held. He started to question the purpose of the war, the justification for the violence. He wondered if it was all worth it, if the liberation of Kuwait was worth the cost of so many innocent lives. The loss of Ramirez and the discovery of the dead civilians shattered Bob's worldview. He realized that war was not a heroic adventure, but a brutal and senseless tragedy. He realized that there were no winners in war, only losers. The experience changed him in profound ways. He became more cynical, more disillusioned, more aware of the complexities of the world. He lost his innocence, his optimism, his faith in humanity. He was a broken man, struggling to make sense of the horrors he had witnessed. He carried the weight of loss and grief with him, a burden that he would bear for the rest of his life. The war had taken its toll, not just on his body, but on his soul. Days blurred into weeks, marked by sporadic fighting and the constant threat of attack. Bob moved through the motions, numb and detached, going where he was told, doing what he had to do. But inside, he was slowly crumbling. Then, one evening, something shifted. Their unit had set up a temporary camp near a dried-up riverbed. The fighting had been particularly intense that day, and everyone was exhausted and on edge. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the desert, a strange calm descended. Someone produced a deck of cards, and a small group of soldiers gathered around a makeshift table, their faces etched with weariness. Bob hesitated for a moment, then decided to join them. He hadn't played cards in years, but he needed something to distract him from the horrors he had witnessed. The game was simple, poker, played for small stakes, mostly cigarettes and candy. But it was more than just a game. It was a chance to connect with his fellow soldiers, to laugh, to forget, even if just for a little while. As they played, the sun continued to set, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange, pink, and purple. It was a breathtaking sight, a moment of unexpected beauty in the midst of ugliness. Bob remembers looking at the sunset, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if the beauty of the sky was washing away the pain and sorrow he had been carrying. They shared stories, they joked, they teased each other. For a few precious hours, they were not soldiers at war, but just a group of friends, sharing a moment of camaraderie. Someone produced a can of peaches, a rare treat in the harsh conditions. They shared it around, savoring each bite. It was a small thing, but it tasted like heaven. As the night wore on, the mood mellowed. They sat in silence, watching the stars appear in the sky. The desert was quiet, peaceful, almost serene. Bob felt a sense of connection to his fellow soldiers, a sense of belonging. They had been through so much together, they had shared so much pain and loss. They were a band of brothers, bound together by their shared experiences. That night, Bob slept soundly for the first time in weeks. The memory of the sunset, the game of cards, the shared can of peaches, stayed with him, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there. The card game and sunset offered a brief respite, but the war continued, and Bob knew he couldn't remain detached forever. He had to find a way to cope, to keep going, to honor the memory of Ramirez. A few days later, their unit was tasked with clearing a series of bunkers that had been heavily fortified by Iraqi forces. Intelligence suggested that the bunkers were lightly defended, but they soon discovered that the information was wrong. As they approached the bunkers, they came under heavy fire. Machine guns, mortars, and rocket-propelled grenades rained down on them. The attack was fierce and unrelenting. Bob remembers the feeling of fear, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He wanted to run, to hide, to escape the chaos. But he knew he couldn't. He was a soldier, and his fellow soldiers were depending on him. Their squad leader, Sergeant Miller, was hit. He went down hard, clutching his leg. He was screaming in pain. Without hesitation, Bob ran towards him, ignoring the bullets whizzing past his head. He reached Miller and dragged him behind a sandbag barrier. "I'm hit bad, Bob," Miller gasped, his face pale. "I don't think I'm going to make it." Bob quickly assessed the wound. It was serious, but not immediately life-threatening. He applied a tourniquet to stop the bleeding and radioed for help. "Hold on, Miller," Bob said, his voice calm and reassuring. "Help is on the way. You're going to be okay." He stayed with Miller, comforting him, encouraging him, keeping him awake. He knew that if Miller lost consciousness, he would likely die. The enemy fire continued to rain down on them. Bob knew they were sitting ducks, but he refused to leave Miller's side. He was determined to save his friend's life. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, a medic arrived. He quickly stabilized Miller and prepared him for evacuation. As Miller was being carried away, he looked at Bob and smiled weakly. "Thanks, Bob," he whispered. "You saved my life." Bob watched as Miller was loaded onto a helicopter and flown away. He felt a sense of relief, but also a sense of pride. He had faced his fears and acted courageously. He had saved his friend's life. In that moment, Bob realized that he was stronger than he thought he was. He realized that he could overcome his fear and act heroically, even in the face of danger. He had found a new sense of purpose, a new reason to keep going. He had honored the memory of Ramirez by saving the life of Miller. The experience changed him, empowering him. He was healing. Saving Miller's life was a turning point, but it wasn't the final turning point. It gave Bob strength, but he still struggled with the larger questions, the purpose of it all. He was no longer consumed by despair, but he wasn't at peace either. The pivotal moment came weeks later, during a lull in the fighting. Their unit was stationed near a refugee camp, providing security and humanitarian aid. Bob found himself assigned to help with the distribution of food and water. He remembers the faces of the refugees, their eyes filled with desperation and gratitude. They had lost everything, their homes, their families, their livelihoods. They were completely dependent on the kindness of strangers. One day, a young boy approached Bob. He was about 8 years old, dressed in tattered clothes, his face streaked with dirt. He was holding a small, wooden toy car. He looked at Bob with pleading eyes and held out the toy car. Bob didn't understand what he wanted. He knelt down and asked their interpreter to translate. "He wants to give you his toy car," the interpreter said. "He says it's all he has left." Bob was taken aback. He couldn't believe that this young boy, who had lost everything, was willing to give away his most prized possession. He looked at the boy's face, seeing not just desperation, but also resilience, hope, and a profound sense of generosity. In that moment, something clicked inside Bob. He realized that the war wasn't just about politics, or territory, or power. It was about people. It was about protecting the innocent, helping those in need, and making the world a better place. He realized that his role in the war wasn't just about fighting, or killing, or destroying. It was about serving, about giving, about making a difference in the lives of others. He gently declined the boy's gift, explaining that he should keep it. Instead, he offered the boy some food and water. The boy's face lit up with a smile. As Bob watched the boy walk away, clutching his toy car and his food, he felt a profound sense of peace. He had finally found his purpose in the war. He had finally understood his role in it. From that moment on, Bob approached his duties with a new sense of purpose and determination. He focused on helping the refugees, providing them with food, water, medical care, and a sense of hope. He became a symbol of compassion and kindness in a world of violence and destruction. The experience changed his perspective on the war, and on life. He realized that even in the darkest of times, there is always room for hope, for kindness, and for compassion. He learned that true strength lies not in. The news that the war was coming to an end spread like wildfire through the ranks. After months of fighting, of loss, of witnessing unimaginable horrors, the prospect of returning home was almost too good to be true. Bob remembers the mix of emotions that swept through him: relief, joy, and a strange sense of apprehension. He was relieved that the fighting was over, that he had survived. He was overjoyed at the thought of seeing his family again, of returning to a normal life. But he was also apprehensive about what awaited him back home. He knew he was a changed man, and he worried about how he would fit back into the world he had left behind. The days leading up to their departure were filled with activity. They packed their gear, cleaned their weapons, and said their goodbyes. There were tears, hugs, and promises to stay in touch. Bob sought out Davis, the medic who had shown such compassion to the old woman in the village. "I don't know what I'm going to do when I get home," Bob confessed. "I've seen things I can't unsee." Davis put a hand on Bob's shoulder. "It's going to be hard, Bob," he said. "But you're not alone. We're all in this together. Just remember what we learned here. Remember the good things, the moments of kindness, the strength we found in each other." Bob also sought out Miller, who had recovered from his injuries. "Thanks for saving my life, Bob," Miller said, his voice choked with emotion. "I owe you one." "We owe each other, Miller," Bob replied. "We got through this together." As they prepared to leave, Bob thought about Ramirez, about the young boy in the refugee camp, about all the people who had been affected by the war. He knew that he would never forget them. He knew that their memory would stay with him forever. The day of their departure arrived. They boarded transport planes and soared into the sky, leaving behind the desert landscape that had been their home for so long. As they flew, Bob looked out the window, watching the familiar landscape fade into the distance. He felt a sense of closure, a sense of accomplishment, and a sense of hope for the future. He thought about his family, about his parents, his friends, his girlfriend, Mary. He couldn't wait to see them again, to tell them his stories, to share his experiences. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to make it work. He was determined to rebuild his life, to find happiness again, to honor the memory of those he had lost. He was going home. A changed man, but ready to start again. The plane landed on American soil, and a wave of emotion washed over Bob. He was home. He stepped off the plane and onto the tarmac, where a crowd of family and friends were waiting, waving flags and holding signs. He scanned the crowd, searching for his parents and Mary. And then he saw them. His mother's face was beaming, his father's eyes were filled with tears, and Mary was running towards him, her arms outstretched. They embraced, a long, heartfelt hug that seemed to erase the miles and the months that had separated them. He held Mary tight, burying his face in her hair, breathing in her familiar scent. He had missed her so much. His parents rushed forward, engulfing him in another hug. "We're so proud of you, son," his father said, his voice thick with emotion. "Welcome home." The homecoming was overwhelming. There were speeches, parades, and celebrations. Bob was hailed as a hero, a symbol of courage and sacrifice. But beneath the surface, he was struggling. He found it difficult to adjust to civilian life. The noise, the crowds, the constant stimulation were overwhelming. He missed the simplicity of the desert, the camaraderie of his fellow soldiers, the sense of purpose he had found in helping the refugees. He also found it difficult to talk about his experiences. His family and friends wanted to know everything, but he couldn't find the words to describe the horrors he had witnessed. He didn't want to burden them with his pain. He started to withdraw again, isolating himself from those he loved. He spent hours alone, staring out the window, replaying the events of the war in his mind. Mary noticed the change in him. She knew he was struggling, but she didn't know how to help. She tried to be supportive, to listen, to offer comfort. But it wasn't enough. "Bob, you need to talk to someone," she said one day, her voice filled with concern. "You can't keep all this bottled up inside." Bob resisted. He didn't want to admit that he was struggling. He didn't want to be seen as weak. But Mary persisted, and eventually, he agreed to seek help. He started attending therapy sessions, where he was able to talk about his experiences, to process his emotions, and to learn coping mechanisms. It was a long and difficult process, but it was essential to his healing. He also connected with other veterans, who understood what he had been through. They shared their stories, their struggles, and their triumphs. They offered each other support, encouragement, and a sense of belonging. Slowly, gradually, Bob began to heal. He learned to live with the memories of the war, to find meaning in his experiences, and to rebuild his life. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks along the way. But he was determined to succeed. His homecoming was not what he had expected. It wasn't a return to the life he had left behind. It was the beginning of a new chapter, a journey of healing, growth, and self-discovery. He was home, but he had a long way to go. Bob's readjustment to civilian life was fraught with challenges. The most prominent was the PTSD. Loud noises, sudden movements, or even certain smells could trigger flashbacks, transporting him back to the war zone. He'd find himself sweating, shaking, reliving the terror all over again. Sleep was a luxury. Nightmares plagued him, filled with images of Ramirez dying, of the dead civilians, of the chaos and destruction. He'd wake up screaming, his heart pounding, his body drenched in sweat. He also struggled with feelings of alienation. He felt like an outsider, unable to connect with those who hadn't shared his experiences. He couldn't explain what he had seen, what he had felt, what he had lost. They wouldn't understand. He found himself increasingly irritable, snapping at his parents, his friends, even Mary. He knew he was being unfair, but he couldn't control his emotions. He felt like a volcano, ready to erupt at any moment. He also struggled with survivor's guilt. Why had he survived when Ramirez hadn't? Why had he been spared when so many others had perished? He felt like he didn't deserve to be alive. He tried to find work, but he couldn't hold down a job. He was too restless, too anxious, too easily triggered. He'd start a job with enthusiasm, but soon find himself overwhelmed and unable to cope. The physical wounds he sustained during the war also added to his challenges. He had shrapnel embedded in his leg, which caused him chronic pain. He also suffered from hearing loss, a result of the constant explosions. He felt like he was losing himself, that the war had taken everything from him. He was no longer the happy, carefree young man who had enlisted in the army. He was a broken shell of his former self. He drank heavily, trying to numb the pain, to silence the voices in his head. But alcohol only made things worse. It intensified his emotions, increased his irritability, and made him even more isolated. He pushed Mary away, fearing that he would burden her with his problems. He loved her, but he didn't want to ruin her life. He thought she deserved someone better, someone who wasn't damaged by war. His life was spiraling out of control. He was lost, alone, and desperate. He didn't know where to turn. It was Mary, ultimately, who saved him. She refused to give up on him, even when he tried to push her away. She saw through his anger and his withdrawal, recognizing the pain and the trauma that he was hiding. One night, after a particularly bad nightmare, Bob woke up screaming. Mary held him close, comforting him, whispering words of love and support. "You need help, Bob," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You can't keep doing this to yourself." This time, Bob didn't resist. He knew she was right. He was tired of fighting, tired of suffering, tired of being alone. He was ready to seek help. Mary helped him find a therapist who specialized in treating veterans with PTSD. The therapist was patient, understanding, and skilled. He created a safe space for Bob to talk about his experiences, to process his emotions, and to learn coping mechanisms. The therapy was difficult, painful, and often exhausting. But it was also transformative. Bob began to confront his demons, to challenge his negative thoughts, and to heal his emotional wounds. He also started attending meetings at a local veteran organization. There, he met other veterans who had shared similar experiences. They understood what he was going through, and they offered him support, encouragement, and a sense of belonging. He found solace in sharing his stories with them, in listening to their stories, and in knowing that he wasn't alone. They were a band of brothers, bound together by their shared trauma. He also started volunteering at a local homeless shelter, helping other veterans who were struggling with addiction, mental illness, and homelessness. He found purpose in serving others, in giving back to his community. He realized that he couldn't erase the past, but he could learn from it. He could use his experiences to help others, to make a difference in the world. He stopped drinking, started exercising, and began to take better care of himself. He reconnected with his family and friends, and he started to rebuild his relationship with Mary. The healing process was long and arduous, but Bob was determined to succeed. He knew he owed it to himself, to Mary, to Ramirez, and to all the other veterans who were still struggling. He was going to get better. He was going to find peace. He was going to rebuild his life. He actively chose healing. Volunteering at the homeless shelter sparked a passion in Bob. He realized that he had a gift for connecting with people, for understanding their struggles, for offering them hope. He decided to pursue a career in social work, helping other veterans and individuals who were struggling with addiction, mental illness, and homelessness. He went back to school, earning a degree in social work. It was challenging, but he was determined to succeed. He found that his experiences in the war, his struggles with PTSD, and his journey of healing gave him a unique perspective and a deep empathy for those he was trying to help. After graduation, he got a job at a local veteran center, providing counseling and support services to veterans and their families. He thrived in his new role, using his experiences to connect with his clients, to build trust, and to help them navigate the challenges of civilian life. He also found purpose in his family. He and Mary rebuilt their relationship, stronger and more resilient than ever before. They got married, bought a house, and started a family. He became a devoted husband and father, finding joy and fulfillment in his family life. He also discovered a passion for woodworking. He started building furniture, crafting intricate designs, and creating beautiful pieces of art. He found that woodworking was therapeutic, allowing him to express his creativity, to focus his mind, and to find peace. He joined a local woodworking club, where he met other woodworkers who shared his passion. They taught him new techniques, shared their knowledge, and offered him encouragement. He found a sense of community and belonging in the club. He also became active in his community, volunteering his time at local schools, churches, and community organizations. He organized food drives, clothing drives, and fundraising events. He found purpose in giving back to his community, in making a difference in the lives of others. Bob found new purpose in life after the war by dedicating himself to serving others, by pursuing his passions, and by cherishing his family. He had transformed his pain into purpose, his struggles into strength, and his trauma into triumph. He wasn't defined by the war, but he was shaped by it. He had found a way to live with the memories, to honor them. Bob had learned many lessons from his experiences in the Gulf War. Perhaps the most important was that war is a brutal and senseless tragedy, that there are no winners, only losers. He had seen firsthand the devastating effects of war on individuals, on families, and on entire communities. He learned that true strength lies not in violence, but in compassion. He had witnessed acts of kindness and generosity in the midst of the war, moments of humanity that had given him hope and had renewed his faith in the goodness of people. He learned that life is precious, fragile, and fleeting. He had seen so many lives cut short, so many dreams unfulfilled. He realized that every moment is a gift, and that we should cherish every opportunity to live, to love, and to make a difference. He learned about the importance of connection, of community, of belonging. He had found solace and support in his fellow soldiers, in his family, and in his community. He realized that we are not meant to be alone, that we need each other to survive, to thrive, and to heal. He learned about the power of resilience, of the human spirit to overcome adversity. He had seen people endure unimaginable hardships, to face their fears, and to find strength in the face of despair. He realized that we are all capable of more than we think we are, that we can overcome any challenge if we have the will to do so. He learned about the importance of forgiveness, of letting go of anger, resentment, and bitterness. He realized that holding on to these negative emotions only hurts ourselves, that forgiveness is the key to healing and to moving on. He learned about the importance of gratitude, of appreciating the good things in our lives, of focusing on what we have rather than what we lack. He realized that gratitude is a powerful antidote to negativity, that it can transform our perspective and bring us joy and contentment. He learned about himself. He discovered that he was stronger than he thought he was, more resilient than he imagined, and more capable of love and compassion than he had ever believed. He had found his purpose, his. It might sound strange, Bob continued, his voice softer now, but I'm even grateful for the bad times. For the pain, for the loss, for the struggles. He paused, looking out at the horizon. Because those experiences shaped me into the person I am today. He explained that he was grateful for the challenges he faced, the setbacks he endured, and the obstacles he overcame. These experiences had taught him resilience, perseverance, and the importance of never giving up. He was grateful for the people who had supported him along the way, Mary, his family, his friends, his fellow veterans, and his therapist. They had believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. They had offered him love, support, and encouragement, helping him to heal and to grow. He was grateful for the opportunities he had been given, to serve his country, to help others, to pursue his passions, and to make a difference in the world. He recognized that he was fortunate to have had these opportunities, and he was determined to make the most of them. He was even grateful for the war itself. Not for the violence, not for the loss, not for the trauma. But for the lessons it had taught him, for the person it had made him become. He explained that the war had stripped him bare, had forced him to confront his deepest fears, had challenged him to his core. But it had also revealed his strength, his resilience, and his capacity for love and compassion. He was grateful for the relationships he had forged during the war, for the bonds he had shared with his fellow soldiers. They had been through so much together, they had relied on each other, and they had become like brothers. He was grateful for the memory of Ramirez, for the lessons he had learned from his friend's life and death. He knew that Ramirez would never be forgotten, and that his memory would continue to inspire him to live a life of purpose and meaning. He was grateful for the young boy in the refugee camp, for the reminder of hope, kindness, and generosity. He knew that even in the darkest of times, there is always room for compassion. He was grateful for the opportunity to share his story, too. My message to future generations, Bob said, his voice growing stronger again, is this: choose peace. Choose understanding. Choose compassion. He urged young people to learn from the mistakes of the past, to study history, to understand the causes of war, and to work towards creating a more peaceful world. He encouraged them to embrace diversity, to respect different cultures, and to build bridges of understanding between people of different backgrounds. He challenged them to be critical thinkers, to question authority, and to stand up for what is right, even when it's difficult. He implored them to be kind to one another, to show empathy, and to offer support to those who are struggling. He reminded them that every individual has the power to make a difference, to create positive change in the world. He told them that the future is in their hands, that they have the responsibility to build a better world for themselves and for generations to come. He urged them to never forget the sacrifices that had been made by those who had served in the military, to honor their memory, and to learn from their experiences. He encouraged them to support veterans, to help them readjust to civilian life, and to provide them with the care and support they need. He reminded them that freedom is not free, that it comes at a cost, and that it must be protected and defended. He told them that the greatest threat to peace is not external enemies, but internal divisions, hatred, and intolerance. He urged them to fight against these forces, to promote unity, understanding, and respect. He challenged them to be leaders, to be role models, and to inspire others to join them in the pursuit of peace. He reminded them that the world is a complex and challenging place, but that it is also full of beauty, wonder, and opportunity. He urged them to embrace the challenges, to explore the world, and to make their mark on history. He told them that he had faith in them, that he believed they could create a better world, a world of peace, understanding, and compassion. He ended his message with a simple plea: choose love. Choose hope. Choose peace. It's so important that we never forget the sacrifices of those who served, Bob said, his voice filled with reverence. We owe them a debt that we can never fully repay. He explained that remembering their sacrifices is not just about honoring the past, but also about learning from it, about ensuring that we never repeat the mistakes that led to war in the first place. He urged people to visit war memorials, to attend remembrance ceremonies, and to learn about the history of the Gulf War. He encouraged them to talk to veterans, to listen to their stories, and to thank them for their service. He reminded them that many veterans are still struggling with the physical and emotional wounds of war, and that they need our support and understanding. He emphasized the importance of providing veterans with access to quality healthcare, mental health services, and job training programs. He urged people to advocate for policies that support veterans and their families. He reminded them that remembering the sacrifices of those who served is not just a responsibility of the government, but a responsibility of every citizen. He shared stories of some of the soldiers he had served with, of their courage, their selflessness, and their dedication to duty. He talked about Ramirez, about his quiet strength, his unwavering loyalty, and his infectious smile. He spoke of Davis, the medic, about his compassion, his skill, and his unwavering commitment to helping others. He remembered Miller, about his humor, his resilience, and his unwavering friendship. He told stories of other soldiers he had known, of their struggles, their triumphs, and their sacrifices. He reminded everyone that these were not just soldiers, but also fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, brothers, sisters, friends, and neighbors. They were ordinary people who had done extraordinary things, who had answered the call to duty, and who had given their all for their country. He urged everyone to remember their names, to honor their memory, and to never forget their sacrifices. He concluded his remarks with a moment of silence, a tribute to those who had served and sacrificed. The gentle breeze made the porch swing creak softly. The sun was starting to set. Bob leaned back in the porch swing, the setting sun casting long shadows across the lawn. The air was still, the only sound the gentle creaking of the swing and the distant chirping of crickets. He closed his eyes for a moment, reflecting on his life, his service, and his enduring hope for a better future. Looking back, he said, his voice thoughtful, I can honestly say that I wouldn't trade my experiences for anything. The good, the bad, the ugly, it all made me who I am today. He acknowledged that the war had taken a toll, that it had left him with scars, both visible and invisible. But it had also given him gifts, strength, resilience, compassion, and a deep appreciation for life. He was grateful for the opportunity to have served his country, to have fought for what he believed in, and to have made a difference in the world. He was proud of his service, proud of the sacrifices he had made, and proud of the man he had become. He was grateful for the love and support of his family, his friends, and his community. They had helped him to heal, to grow, and to find his way back to happiness. He was grateful for the opportunity to have found purpose in his life after the war, to have helped others, to have pursued his passions, and to have made a positive impact on the world. He was grateful for the simple things in life, a warm cup of coffee, a beautiful sunset, a loving embrace from his wife, a laughter with his grandchildren. He was filled with hope for the future, for his children, for his grandchildren, and for all the future generations who will inherit this world. He believed that they had the power to create a better world, a world of peace, understanding, and compassion. He had faith in their ability to learn from the mistakes of the past, to embrace diversity, and to build bridges of understanding between people of different backgrounds. He knew that the journey would not be easy, that there would be challenges along the way. But he also knew that they were capable of overcoming any obstacle, of achieving any goal, and of creating a brighter future for all. He opened his eyes, his gaze fixed on the setting sun. I've lived a long and full life, he said, a smile spreading across his face. I've seen the best and the worst of humanity. And I still believe in the power of good. I still believe in the power of hope. And I still believe that the future is bright. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in a blaze of glory. The porch swing creaked softly, a gentle rhythm that echoed the peace and contentment in Bob's heart. His story was complete.